Good morning. Welcome to our brief explanation of the Australs judge test. It is a stunning morning in Auckland, and what I encourage you to do is to go into your emails, because in your emails you'll get a basically transcript of the answers that you gave when you filled out the judge test, and that means you can follow on quite easily. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the answers to the part of the test that had multiple choice answers, and then I will go to the part of the test that involved judging a particular debate. So I'll share my screen just so you are able to see the test as we go along. So the first question, which of the following statements is true, basically asks what is the appropriate way to score a reply speech. There are two correct answers. The first correct answer appropriately divides the score that you get from the substantive speech by 2, which is the correct way to do it. There's also another one which does the same. There are a number of other answers that could be given. One common way that people score incorrectly is to minus 40 from the scores. If you look at this question, they have 79 and they give it a 39, and this question is 76 and a 36. That is an incorrect way. It can have an incredible impact on someone's scores. So make sure you are scoring by dividing by 2 rather than minusing by 40. And obviously you can't have the range is only 35 to 40 with replies, so you can't give a higher than a 40 or lower than a 33. The second question asks you what terms will the globally informed citizen be familiar with without needing an explanation of it? And obviously there'll be more sophisticated characterization here, but the question just asks, is this something that the person is familiar with such that I wouldn't need to define it for them? There are again 3 correct answers. Harm is a correct answer, government is a correct answer, and Botswana is a correct answer, because each of those terms, the globally informed citizen will be roughly familiar with. They know what a harm is, they know what a government is, they know what Botswana is. It's a country in Southern Africa. These are things that can be assumed that people understand, whereas the other options are probably too sophisticated without just a little bit more explanation. So epistemic access, I've done debating for a long time. I'm still not entirely sure what it means. Teams would need to explain that to me. The state power principle is a label for a point, something that would once again need to be explained to me for me to know what it is. And derivatives market is probably the one that's most on the edge. And it is just likely that people will understand what a market is, but it's slightly unlikely that they'll have an intuitive understanding what a derivative is without that just being explained to them slightly more. So there needs to be a definition. This is what a derivative is. It exists within a market, and that will be sufficient for the global informed citizen. The next question gives an example of a claim that you believe is incorrect and the negating team believes is incorrect, but has nonetheless been plausibly justified by a team and not responded to. In this case, there's one clear correct answer, and that's that you should still credit the affirming team for their claim, because despite you knowing something about the other, and despite the negating team seemingly knowing something, there hasn't actually been a response to this material, such to convince you, the judge, who doesn't have that clear conception one way or the other, to believe the negating team when they say that claim is a lie. The next question asks you, how does the globally informed citizen weigh material that hasn't been explicitly explained? Why is this important to someone? And the important thing to note is that the globally informed citizen likely intuitively cares about a number of things, such that it doesn't really need to be justified as to why they should care about them, though of course you can decrease or increase how much the globally informed citizen cares about them on the margins. So in this debate, it is just true that the globally informed citizen probably believes that large job losses are bad, large recessions are bad, and it's not sufficient just to point out that it hasn't been proven that these things are bad. So what you can say is you should still credit the negating team's argument, though of course you can credit it less had there been compelling arguments as to why we shouldn't care about large recessions, and the affirming team can make you care about it more by going into more detailed explanation of why this is such an important thing to care about. The next question asks about definitional challenges. And the test that you need to use is, has the affirming team given a reasonable definition of the topic? It's not about which definition you prefer. It's not even about which definition you think is more reasonable. The test is, has the affirming team given a reasonable definition? And in this question, you think it is reasonable to include advanced calculus in the definition of algebra, which means that you should go with the affirming definition. Next question assesses style. This is a very important question because style has a dramatic impact on how persuasive your material is. Debating is not just about assessing arguments, it's about assessing communication, how we present those arguments, how we engage with those arguments. It is very clearly true that it could be the basis for a higher score that someone gives a speech that punctuates their points in an interesting way and makes you feel favorable to their team. Those are very legitimate aspects of style. Of course, jokes are not a substitute for like real analysis and real points. You can give an extremely funny speech that is nonetheless very unpersuasive for your side of the topic. And jokes don't always add to the persuasiveness of a point. They have to be good jokes, right? They have to be jokes that are actually increase the persuasiveness of a point, insofar as you could use it as the basis for a higher speaker score. The next question asks about Fiat. And the very important test that you need to keep in your mind is that any counter model, we would do this thing instead, requires an explanation of why it is mutually exclusive. It is not mutually exclusive to fund malaria nets and to subsidize vaccine distribution, which means that the negating team can't simply claim we have X amount of political capital, we would use that to do this other thing instead. Rather, they need to explain to you what would a world look like where you don't subsidize vaccine distribution, and why is that a world in which we would give more money to malaria nets. And they might claim we have a set amount of money comes in every year from these particular donors, it's a particular set amount, and that therefore, if you don't subsidize vaccine distribution, you likely have much more money to do other things, and the natural consequence of having much more other things is it gets put into areas that we think are more important. That's an example of how you'd actually analyze that claim, but you can't simply claim we have equal political fiat. That's something that has been quite clearly changed in the new World's Manual, and also is reflected in the new Australs Manual. So sorry, the answer to that is no, you can't merely say that you'll devote political capital to funding malaria nets. Next debate is that we regret the Iraq War. The negating team makes two statements, one in which they ask you just to change the way you think about the past slightly, and it could have been success, and that secondly, they try and adopt a very narrow definition of what the war in Iraq was. Neither of these statements are likely to be effective because it is important to note that you have to defend the thing as it is, not how you wish it would have been. So you can't just say we would change a couple of things and then it would be a success. You have to analyze whether or not it has or has not been a success. And secondly, you have to analyze the totality of the Iraq War. The Iraq War very likely includes the illegal aspects of the Iraq War. The Iraq War is quite an important part of that. And so that's likely a narrowing of the debate that will be unsuccessful. So neither statement. The third, the next question is also one about the way that Fiat operates. The motion is whether you should do something. And in should debates, if you've read the Australs Manual, note that it is both possible and encouraged to give a model. The affirming team gives a reasonable model for deregulation. They say we deregulate in these particular ways, and you think that fulfills the burden of what deregulation does. And the negating team attempts not to address your model, but instead to claim that another type of deregulation would be adopted. This is a policy debate. The affirming team is encouraged to bring a model and a definition. It is very unlikely, in fact, it cannot be successful simply to say that China wouldn't do X thing in the way that you have modeled it. As long as it's a reasonable definition that fulfills the burden of deregulating the car market, it is the affirming team's prerogative to define that model. So no. Next question is about timing. You must end the discussion. This is a non-consensus format, but even in consensus formats, please do not tram the tournament. Once you have had your vote, had your discussion, 15 minutes are up, you need to go and give the oral adjudication. Next question is about scoring. The correct answer to this is just you should remain consistent with the judge briefing. People have strong thoughts about scoring, but note that when you judge in a way that is inconsistent, how people do on the tab, how teams perform, ends up becoming a very arbitrary function of which judges they draw, rather than even a consistent but incorrect way, in your opinion, of scoring. Like scoring is about assessing relative ability. Like the objectives of it doesn't really matter. Just try and judge consistently with other people rather than trying to change the overall format because you think that people don't use high scores or low scores enough. Yeah, just be consistent with the judge grouping. Last question is about basically bits of responses or different parts of points that contradict each other. And I encourage you not to overreact to contradictions, but you should nonetheless be very, very aware of them. You wouldn't disregard the negative response merely because it is new material. You can bring new responses as a third speaker. The third answer is just gibberish, right? I don't even know what that means. Like epistemic access needs to be explained if it is to be used. And this is just an example of something that a team trying to sound smart might say, but it's not something that will be effective in debating. And you also shouldn't disregard the second affirming's argument because there's no structural reasons included to prove that it is true. That needs to be assessed basically on the quality of the debate. And there's you haven't been given any information about that. But there is a contradiction in the negative case, and this diminishes their persuasiveness because their third negating speaker's responses say that the impact is irrelevant as microfinance transactions are not widespread, whereas in the first and second speeches, they say that you make it more accessible and you're likely to have more of them. So it makes it difficult to reconcile those two particular points, which diminishes the persuasiveness of those arguments.